30-year-olds were considered to be old in the Middle Ages. Many people see graphs showing that the average lifespan in the Middle Ages was about 30 years, but this is misleading because it doesn't take into account how averages can be distorted. If I make $1 trillion and you make $1, the average is 500 billion, but that doesn't reflect reality for either of us. The same principle applies to the Middle Ages, where infant mortality rates were much higher than they are today, which dragged the average lifespan down. In reality, it wasn't that uncommon for people who survived infancy to live into their 50s or 60s. Diamonds are rare. Diamonds are actually one of the most common precious stones found in nature, with hundreds of millions of carats mined every year. What's truly rare, however, are gem-quality diamonds, those that are clear, well-formed, and free from major flaws. These high-quality stones are expensive, but they're not usually the ones used in most jewelry. The perception of scarcity and the extremely high prices are largely the result of a controlled supply because of a monopoly. For most of the 20th century, a single company had most of the diamonds, so they were able to control the diamond market by releasing only limited quantities at a time to artificially maintain high prices, creating a sort of fake scarcity. This was paired with massive advertising campaigns that successfully shaped public perception, positioning diamonds as rare and precious stones that symbolize love. These campaigns worked so much that nowadays, most engagement rings have diamonds on them. Lemmings commit mass unalivement. Lemming populations naturally go through cycles of booms and crashes every few years. When their numbers get too high, they migrate in large groups to find new territory and food. During these migrations, some may fall off cliffs or drown while crossing rivers, but this is accidental, not intentional. The myth of mass lemming unalivement was popularized by the 1958 Disney documentary White Wilderness, where filmmakers staged scenes of lemmings jumping off a cliff. The crew expected to film this supposed behavior, since the myth already existed, but when it didn't happen, they threw the animals off the cliff themselves to get the footage. According to aerodynamics, a bee shouldn't be able to fly. In the 1930s, a French scientist asked an engineer friend to analyze bee flight using aerodynamic principles. Shockingly, the math didn't work, as the wings seemed too small to support the bee's weight. The thing is, insects don't have fixed wings like airplanes, nor do they flap their wings up and down like birds. Instead, they use rotating, flapping, and much more complex motion patterns. These motions became especially apparent when high-speed photography and fluid dynamics research, particularly from the 1990s onward, revealed how bees actually fly. Lie detectors. Lie detectors, also called polygraph machines, measure heart rate, blood pressure, breathing rate, and skin sweat to assess how stressed a person is. The idea is that lying causes stress, which leads to noticeable changes in these readings. However, these machines are highly unreliable, as they measure only stress, not deception itself. Stress levels can rise simply from the pressure of being questioned, especially if the topic is sensitive, even when the person is telling the truth. On the other hand, sociopaths or highly trained individuals can often remain calm enough to keep their readings within normal limits. Moreover, the machine must be calibrated before the test begins to establish the person's baseline responses. Some people deliberately manipulate these baselines by causing themselves mild pain, like biting their tongue, or inducing anxiety, so that later reactions seem normal by comparison. Because of these limitations, polygraph results are not admissible as evidence in court in the US and many other countries. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. This is thought to be the result of a promotion by Kellogg to sell more cereal, but it doesn't have any real scientific basis. However, that doesn't mean Kellogg invented the concept of breakfast or that it wasn't considered important before his marketing campaign. Breakfast was actually quite popular in earlier times, especially because many people did manual labor early in the morning and needed the necessary nutrients to get through it. Mice like cheese. If you've ever tried to actually set up a mousetrap with cheese on it, you might have noticed that it didn't work. That's not just because the cheese dries out pretty quickly, losing its scent and attractiveness to mice, but also because mice don't particularly prefer cheese at all. They eat pretty much anything with nutritional value, and like many other animals, they tend to go for high sugar items like candies or fruit, which provide much more energy. The myth might have originated because, in the past, people stored food like grains, cured meats, and cheese in cellars or pantries. Since cheese was one of the more aromatic and accessible foods left out or stored where mice could reach it, people would see mice eating cheese and start thinking they had a special preference for it. There are alpha and beta wolves. In the 1960s, a biologist named David Mech studied wolves kept in captivity. By observing their behavior, he concluded that some wolves were more dominant, so-called alpha wolves, while others were more submissive, labeled beta or omega. However, this dominance hierarchy is mostly a result of captivity, where wolves are forced into close quarters. In the wild, wolf packs are typically families made up of 2 parents and their offspring, with no rigid dominance ladder. Even David Mech himself later reversed his position. After observing wild wolves, he recognized the flaws in the earlier research and has since repeatedly asked people to stop using his outdated study. Before Columbus, people thought the world was flat. Many think that people before Columbus thought that the world was flat, but that's just outright false. Going as far back as ancient Greece, in the 5th century BCE, around 2,000 years before Columbus, educated people already knew the Earth was round. Pythagoras and Plato themselves supported the idea of a spherical Earth. And by the 3rd century BCE, Eratosthenes not only knew the Earth was round, but he even calculated its circumference with surprising accuracy using shadows and geometry. To be precise, he was only 2% off, which is absolutely crazy. This myth might have originated from Washington Irving's book in 1828 called A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus, where he fictionalized a dramatic scene where churchmen and scholars argue with Columbus, claiming the Earth is flat, while the actual real debate was about the size of the ocean. Goldfish have a short memory. A popular myth says that goldfish have a memory of just 3 seconds, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, they actually have a pretty good memory. They're able to remember things from up to 5 months ago, and they're also quite smart. They can be trained to swim through hoops, push levers, and follow patterns. Interestingly, they can also distinguish between different songs and sounds, as shown in studies where goldfish were successfully trained to associate specific sounds with feeding time. Furthermore, they can recognize human faces and often swim to the front of the tank when they see their regular caregiver. Their attention span isn't as bad as people think either. They've even been able to complete puzzles and navigate mazes. Dogs only see in black and white. While we have around 6 million cone photoreceptor cells in our eyes, dogs have only about 1.2 million. Also, we have 3 types of cones, red, green, and blue, while dogs have only 2, yellow and blue. This, however, doesn't mean that they only see in black and white. What they have is called dichromatic vision, meaning they mostly see just yellow and blue, with other colors appearing as different shades of these two. Essentially, it's similar to how colorblind people perceive the world. It's just a bit harder for dogs to distinguish colors in certain parts of the spectrum. For example, anything from red to green would appear as various shades of yellow or brownish colors. Keep in mind, though, that what they lack in vision, they more than make up for with their sense of smell. They have about 220 million to 300 million olfactory receptors, while humans have around 5 to 6 million, and the part of their brain devoted to smell is proportionally about 40 times larger than in humans. This enables them to detect scents at concentrations as low as 1 part per trillion, which would be like detecting a single drop of liquid in 20 Olympic swimming pools. Shaking a Polaroid picture will help it develop. Not only does shaking a Polaroid not help the picture develop, but it actually pushes the developing chemicals to one side, causing over- or underdevelopment. The myth comes from the habit associated with older Polaroid cameras, where users had to pull apart 2 layers of film after a short development time. During this process, waving or shaking the photo helped it dry faster, especially when the developer or fixer was still wet and could smudge. However, this didn't apply to later models, which developed internally and didn't require any separation or shaking. Interestingly, the popular song Hey Ya by Outkast helped reinforce the myth with its famous lyric, "Shake it like a Polaroid picture." After the song took off, Polaroid had to publicly explain that shaking the photos was actually counterproductive. Fruit juice is healthy. Many people who are used to eating sweets and want to go on a diet often start drinking fruit juice as a substitute for sweetness. But in reality, it's not that great of a choice. The reason is that the sweet flavor in juice comes from a type of sugar called fructose. So at the end of the day, you're still eating sugar. Depending on the quantity and the fruit, some juices can even contain as much sugar as a can of Coca-Cola. On top of that, fruit juice is a liquid, which makes it much easier to consume quickly and in large amounts without much thought, unlike solid fruit, which takes longer to eat and is more filling. For example, the average strawberry smoothie recipe calls for an entire carton of strawberries, half a cup of milk, half a cup of yogurt, and a few tablespoons of sugar. That said, this argument mostly applies to calorie content. Fruits do tend to be healthier than sodas overall, thanks to the vitamins, fiber, and other nutrients that come with those calories. Genetically modified organisms, GMOs, are bad and unhealthy. Crops or foods whose DNA has been modified aren't inherently bad. Most of these modifications actually make the organisms healthier by making them resistant to disease or enhancing their nutritional value. For example, golden rice, a GMO, was developed to help fight vitamin A deficiency in poor regions. Overall, GMO crops have helped reduce the need for pesticides, land use, and water consumption. It's essentially a modern form of selective breeding, something humans have been doing for thousands of years, just with less precise methods. A clear example is how wild corn was gradually transformed into the sweet corn we eat today. That said, GMOs aren't inherently good either. These DNA modifications must be rigorously studied before being released to the market to avoid unintended effects on human health and the environment. Your blood is blue when not oxygenated. Blood actually comes in just 2 shades of red, dark red for venous blood and bright red for arterial blood. Arterial blood is oxygen-rich, which gives it its bright red color. The myth that blood is blue likely comes from the fact that veins appear bluish under the skin. However, this is due to how light penetrates and scatters through the skin, not because the blood itself is blue. You generally won't see arteries through the skin because they're located deeper in the body and are better protected. This is important since a cut to an artery could cause rapid blood loss, and you could even bleed out in minutes due to the high pressure at which oxygenated blood is pumped from the heart. Knuckle cracking leads to arthritis. The sound of knuckle cracking comes from gas bubbles popping in the joint fluid, and it doesn't cause any damage to the bones, cartilage, or ligaments. There even was a famous study by Dr. Donald Unger, who cracked the knuckles on one hand for 60 years and found no difference in arthritis between his 2 hands. The myth likely originated from made-up warnings intended to discourage people from cracking their knuckles, mostly because others found the sound annoying. You are supposed to pee on a jellyfish sting to ease the pain. Not only is it unhelpful, but peeing on a jellyfish sting can actually make the situation worse. Urine's chemical makeup varies from person to person, and in some cases, it can change the pH of the sting site in a way that triggers more venom release or causes undischarged stingers to fire. The recommended treatment for a jellyfish sting is to rinse the area with vinegar, which can neutralize certain jellyfish toxins and help prevent additional stingers from activating. The myth likely originated from the belief that urine is sterile and contains ammonia, and it was further popularized by the famous episode of Friends where the characters rely on this method. If you swallow gum, it stays in your stomach for 5 to 7 years. This is completely false. Gum is made of sweeteners, flavorings, and a gum base. While it's true that the gum base is indigestible, similar to the fiber in corn or seeds, it doesn't just stay in your stomach. Instead, it moves through your digestive system like other undigested material and is passed in your stool, usually within a day or 2. The myth likely began as a way for parents to discourage kids from swallowing gum. The only real risk comes from repeatedly swallowing large amounts, which could potentially lead to digestive blockages. Being cold will make you sick with the flu. Being cold doesn't directly cause you to get sick, but it can have indirect effects. Cold weather can slightly weaken your immune response, and since we tend to spend more time indoors during colder months, often in close proximity to others, the chances of getting infected increase. But the cold itself isn't what makes you sick. The same goes for going outside with wet hair. It doesn't directly cause illness. Additionally, cold air is usually drier, and flu viruses tend to survive longer in dry conditions. Dry air can also dry out your nasal passages, making it easier for viruses to enter and infect your body. Fat in your diet is the source of your body fat. Many low-fat diet trends from the 1980s and 1990s helped spread this myth. Ironically, they often led people to overconsume refined carbs and sugars instead, both of which can contribute to weight gain, sometimes even more than fat itself. The truth is, fat in your diet doesn't directly lead to body fat. What causes weight gain is a calorie surplus, meaning you take in more calories than you burn. The excess energy is then stored as fat. That said, fat is energy dense, meaning it contains a lot of calories per gram, so it's easier to consume more calories quickly when eating fatty foods, but that can be said for sugar and carbs as well. If you liked this video, subscribe for similar ones or join my Discord to suggest another.